Welcome everyone to the virtual Common Hour. My name is Jim Strick, and I'm the co-chair this year along with Rachel Anderson Rayburn of the Common Hour Committee. I'm also a professor of Earth and Environment and Science, Technology, and Society here at F&M. I'd like to introduce you to our ASL interpreter, Emily Phipps, who will be interpreting for us this fall. Thank you, Emily. A little background for those of you who are new to Common Hour. The Common Hour began in the spring of 2010 with the purpose of bringing the entire Franklin and Marshall community to gather for culturally and academically enriching events and pizza weekly during the academic year. The faculty voted to create the program, and the weekly schedule was entirely rearranged to allow for time on Thursdays. Events were intended to be a mix of vital international, national, local, and institutional issues, as well as dance, music, theater, and other creative presentations. We celebrated the 10th anniversary of Common Hour this past spring, just as the pandemic abruptly shut everything down. Due to our new module schedule this fall, virtual Common Hour now takes place on Wednesdays, and we'll continue our tradition as a community of students, faculty, staff, alumni, prospective students, donors, trustees, members of the Lancaster community, and beyond. Common Hour is watched in classrooms, house commons, dining halls, and beyond in our Lancaster community. The Common Hour community is unique and essential to the F&M experience. We welcome all the first-year students. We miss our sophomores and international students and others who are not on campus. Welcome to all community members from the larger community here in Lancaster. We're very happy all of you are here with us. Next week's Common Hour will feature J. Drew Lanham with a talk entitled Birding While Black. This semester, we're featuring student groups as virtual pizza servers. If your group would like to be featured, email the Common Hour Committee. This week's group is the Rumspringers. The Rumspringers have been F&M's resident student improvisational comedy troupe since 2010. The group auditions for new members each semester and includes a mix of theater majors and non-majors, with representation from freshmen through seniors. This semester, the group is migrating out of their usual other room theater space. Look for their socially distanced outdoor improv in the near future. As always, we'll have Q&A at the end of the hour. Students, staff, and faculty can submit questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. We won't identify people by name, but we'd like to know if you're a student and what year you are, or for faculty and staff, what department or office you're in. So if you could include that with your question, that would be great. If we get more questions than can be answered, we'll try to select a diverse set of questions before we run out of time. And now I'd like to introduce Barbara K. Altman, Ph.D., who became the 16th president of Franklin and Marshall College in August 2018. Since joining the F&M community, President Altman has championed the power of a liberal arts education to launch leaders at all levels. In her Common Hour talk, President Altman will draw on poetry and a panel conversation to reflect on our shared yet diverse experiences of leading and learning during a global pandemic. And so, without further ado, here is President Altman.
Hi, everybody. Barbara Altman here. You can see I am in my office in Old Main, which in and of itself gives me a lot of joy, having spent much of the last 6 weeks, I beg your pardon, the 6 months, working primarily off campus. So it's a pleasure to be here. And I can't tell you how thrilled I was to see the terrific demonstration and march in support of Black Lives Matter that took place just before this. We've demonstrated how to protest, how to take action, how to engage in activism safely and well in the time of a pandemic. And that is a great achievement. So many thanks to the organizers and to everybody who showed up on Hartman Green to do this very important action today. I want to thank our interpreter, our sign language interpreter, Emily. Thank you, Emily. Much appreciated. And I'm going to launch what is a consideration about what it means to lead an institution like this, but to lead anywhere in any piece of it during a time of huge uncertainty. And I'm going to use some poetry to do this. Before I start, though, I want to thank the Common Hour Committee. I want to thank Professor Rachel Rayburn and Professor Strick, who just introduced me. The Common Hour Committee has, along with the virtual pizza servers, of course, have done exactly what we're talking about here. They have figured out how to make Common Hour, a really important institution of Franklin and Marshall, work in these uncertain times in a way that adapts to our current circumstances and the way we need to work this fall. And they're really setting an example of leading and learning, which is the topic of today's discussion, of course. Before I go any further and delve into a piece of poetry with you that I'd like to look at together as a way of thinking about what we're all living with at the moment, I want to acknowledge that since we were last in residence, since last spring, the F&M community has lost two wonderful members of our faculty who were still among us in the spring and who are greatly missed by all of us, by their colleagues and by students alike. Those two colleagues are Dr. Matthew Hoffman, Associate Professor of Judaic Studies and History, who died in June, Dr. David Schuyler, Arthur Edrick of campus. And of course, the whole campus looks and feels and works quite differently in so many ways than it did prior to March. I'm delighted for the third time now to launch Common Hour. And I want to start with a short reflection on the word disruption, right? How many platitudes or how many overused words have we now developed for talking about the pandemic? It is unprecedented. It is unprecedented. It is unlike anything we've seen before. And we talk a lot about disruption. It's worth looking at the etymology, the history of that word. It's from a Latin root, and what it really means is to break something apart, or to use older, almost archaic language, to render something asunder, just to explode something that existed and then no longer does. That's what's happened. That's what's happened to the way we're used to learning, the way we're used to working, the way we're used to socializing, the way we're used to getting our groceries, the way we're used to going to the movies. So this is a moment of enormous disruption, but something has broken and we will never put it back again the same way. It's never going to be the same. So in a place like this, with outstanding students, with a very idealistic agenda to provide among the best undergraduate education in this country, we are preparing our students for the future, as we always do, as we have for 233 years. But now the future is really pretty radically different than it was 6 months ago, 8 months ago. And that is what we need to adjust to. If an institution's only goal is entirely to prevent COVID-19, then everybody would just stay home. We would just shut down and we would wait and put our heads down until all of this is over. But there are actually multiple goals. Just preventing COVID-19 is not the only goal. One of the other goals is continuing the academic experience. We are by definition a residential college, and we've had to figure out what pieces of that we can do under the current circumstances. And so the goal then becomes not just preventing COVID-19, but actually managing risk. So this is a huge exercise for all of us, individually and collectively, in figuring out how to manage risk and still do what we hold so dearly, this mission of ours that we want to fulfill, to learn and to teach and to be in community together. Another goal is learning how to function fully in uncertain times. How do we keep doing what we do in all of its many facets when things were broken, when there's been real disruption? And that message, that goal of learning to function fully in uncertain times is becoming ever more important because we don't know what kind of disruption is coming next. So what we're really dealing with is an ampersand situation, like that ampersand in the middle of F and M. There are parallel narratives here. We need to reconcile the strong strain of individualism that is one of the hallmarks of American society. And we need to reconcile that with the need to watch out for, to preserve, to act in the benefit of the common good. So that individualism for which this country is known and that need to act for the common good and in the common good, those are not necessarily in contradiction with each other here. It is an ampersand kind of a parallel narrative. So as well as managing risk, we're also in a major experiment in managing fear. We're learning how to manage fear in ourselves and in others. And we're learning to manage loss. So much of what we took for granted about everyday life is lost to us right now. And in our case, that involves a lot of what we think of when we think about traditional liberal arts campuses like ours. So here's the most sobering part of all of that. This loss and this disruption and what's broken, this isn't temporary. It's important to recognize that the disciplines and the practices that we're now putting in place, they're really necessary preparation for the future that all of us are facing in one way or another. We don't have a roadmap for how to do this. None of us in our generations have done this before, and the science wasn't available the last time there was a pandemic of this magnitude. So this is uncharted. There's another one of those metaphors we've been using a lot. This is uncharted territory. There are no practices and there is no rigor that prepare us for this particular scenario, for this intentionality to continue to function fully, to figure out how to function fully. This is new terrain. We're all feeling tremendously stressed about it. So what we need to do when we come together like this is to try to change the frame. We need to try to reframe this as an exercise and get beyond our fear and our stress and raise our sights a little bit, look at it all from a higher elevation. We don't want to lose sight of what is important and valuable. Time is too precious for that. So instead of getting mired in what we are afraid of, we're actually going to have to confront this. And so far, here we are in week 3, doing a really great job. I'm going to read a poem to you that I was recently sent by a friend. I received it from a friend with whom I often exchange poetry. And this poem struck me as a poem that so beautifully describes what we're living through right now and the responsibility it hands us, the task that it gives us. From my perspective, I read poetry both for pleasure, but also as my scholarly life, as part of my scholarly life. And because I'm a scholar of the Middle Ages, I'm used to working on poetry that was written in a culture where everything was communicated orally. Everything was read aloud and was received by ear. We're no longer that kind of a culture. And so many people don't have the habit of reading or listening to poetry. Luckily, we have some very, very fine poets on this campus and a lot of scholars and students who take poetry as a form of activism, as a form of cultural expression. So some of us are good at reading poetry, but some of us don't do that as a habitual practice. And so I'm just going to suggest that you might find ways to connect with this poem by doing the following. Here's what I'd suggest. Listen not just to the words, but listen to the emotional impact that the poem has on you. Listen to it for the sound of it, as well as for the meaning of the words. And as you're listening, it doesn't matter if it doesn't fully penetrate, if you don't follow every structure. What resonates with you? What grabs you? What strikes you at your gut level? What interests you in this language? So this poem will really talk about the ways in which we are unprepared to deal with life and whatever life hands us. And it really is about the theme of this talk. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read you the poem first, and then I'm going to ask our wonderful technologist to play you a recording of the poem that also has a musical soundtrack behind it and visuals. So first you'll hear it in my voice, and then you'll see it in a multimedia experience. So this is a poem written by the poet David Whyte, Whyte, from a book of poetry that he published in 2003 called Everything is Waiting for You. That's the name of the collection. And the poem is called Sometimes. So here's David Whyte's poem, Sometimes, in my voice. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests, conceived out of nowhere, but in this place beginning to lead everywhere. Requests to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away. Now I'm going to ask Josh Hankins to play a video, which is David Whyte reading his own poem, set to music and with visuals. Thank you, Josh.
Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories, who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound. You come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests. Conceived out of nowhere, but in this place beginning to lead everywhere. Requests to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right. No right. No right to go away.
Thank you, Josh. So there's that black swirl of questions at the end that we're all mired in and that are so scary. So what lines do I want to extract from this poem? Which ones spoke to me most eloquently about the situation that we're in right now? So first of all, it's that line near the beginning. We are in a place, and I'm quoting Whyte's poem, we are in a place whose only task is to trouble you, is to trouble us with tiny but frightening requests. The pandemic is that kind of space. It is full of tiny but frightening requests. Tiny requests like wash your hands more than ever, wear the encumbrance of your mask, which is never far from me these days. Summon the courage to be alone more than you're used to. Summon the courage to ask and expect many, many others to do those same things. A second piece that I find particularly relevant is that notion that this kind of space was conceived out of nowhere. Very few of us could have seen this coming. But in White's words, this place is beginning to lead everywhere. It's leading us to figure out how to deal with circumstances that will go far beyond this pandemic, that will probably mark this stage, this decade of the 21st century. So, this really is leading everywhere. It is a true pandemic, which is an epidemic that occurs worldwide, right? And finding our way through this woods, this scary place with its scary questions, is the only path that will lead us all out of it. It'll put an end to our fear of this disease. It will put an end to the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of deaths. In this country alone, 6.3 million people have contracted COVID-19, and it has killed 190,000 people in this country. That is a pandemic, and that is this scary place. So the third piece that I want to pull out of the poem is that the situation, this place with its troubling tasks, this place is requiring us to, and I quote White again, to stop what we were doing. I'm changing the verb tense. It's requiring that we changed what we were doing back in the spring of 2020. And it requires of us that we stop what we were becoming then, right at that moment, while we were doing it, because in fact, we need to become something else. So this poem, which deserves a great deal more time, but I encourage you to go back to the recording if you so choose. This will be available on the Common Hour site. I just want to pull out the lessons for me, the lessons in leadership of the pandemic, of the 6 months in which we as an institution have been grappling with it, and I as president have been leading F&M through this time of great disruption. So here are the lessons that I've taken away. And as soon as I've given you my 3, we're going to turn to a student panel. We've got 3 wonderful students who are going to talk about their leadership in this time and what lessons they're taking away. I'll give you mine quickly. The first lesson I extract from this is that there's no roadmap. We've already said that one, and I'll say it again. We're finding our way through that forest, around trees, up trees, down trees, avoiding trees, taking them down where we need. This is unfamiliar territory. We have to find our own way through this forest. And a great deal depends on it, because we don't get to just put our heads down and wait until COVID-19 is over. We actually need to learn to live with COVID-19. So the second lesson in leadership and in life for me from all of this is the importance of defamiliarization. What was familiar, what was comfortable, what was even mundane, what we didn't even stop to think about, what was completely quotidian, completely taken for granted, all of that takes on a new meaning in this new circumstance. In this instance, we're learning to share a learning space together. I'm not kidding when I say I'm thrilled to see students on Hartman Green. I'm thrilled to see those of you on this Common Hour. It makes me so happy because we've had so many months where we couldn't interact in person at all, and we hadn't yet become as adept as connecting remotely with each other. So I've been struck by faculty who talk to me about the joy, the wonderfulness of being back in class, of seeing their students, those who can be in the learning space with them, and those who join with great courage and tenacity from remote spaces to be part of this experience together. So we are, in fact, moving carefully through the forest. That's how we're learning to live in conditions of which we have no previous experience, and to prepare for a world that has irrevocably changed. The third lesson for me is interdependence. I'm an independent person. I'm relatively autonomous. I am an introvert. I like to work collaboratively, but I did not know until now how interdependent we are with each other. There is no way to do this as a bunch of solo agents. We actually do need to depend on each other. Recently, one of our faculty published an op-ed in Inside Higher Ed, and it was about what he has learned in teaching, about teaching in a pandemic. One of the things that he pulls out is, and I quote, "I'm living in a more uncertain, fragile, and interdependent world." That keyword, I pulled that from Professor Nestruck's op-ed in Inside Higher Education last week. He said he realized why we need each other. And I'm quoting from his op-ed, with our lives more intimately wedded together, the interdependence of the world that brought the virus to my doorstep must also be the starting point for going forward, for it inescapably reveals we need to do this together. So thank you, Professor Jeff Nesteruk, for those words, which I've just quoted. Those struck me as so very true for what I have learned on all of this. So I'm going to pull in conclusion from another David Whyte poem, from another poem, the title poem of that volume from which I extracted sometimes. This is from the poem called Everything is Waiting for You. And the line that I want to end with is this line from that poem, quote, your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone. We can't act this drama as if we are alone. We truly are wedded to each other, and our fate will rise or fall with each other. So it takes a team to lead. It takes people with a whole range of experience. And no matter how well I am prepared or the individual across the table from me is prepared, no matter how much I carry through on my obligations, I still depend on legions of others. I depend on at least 2,200 students and 700 employees. I depend on their families and those families' friends and the business owners of the gas stations and the grocery stores we frequent, and the people, the families and friends of the people who run those businesses. We depend on all of us and all of them to get us through this crisis and to develop a much greater degree of preparedness for the next one. So in this endeavor, in this college, in this institution, this very fine school that is Franklin and Marshall, we are engaged in an idealistic endeavor. The institutions of higher learning can set the model on this. Our job is to provide the education in community, including those in our time zone and location and those internationally and across the country who join with us remotely. We are providing the education. We are educating each other in what it's going to take to prepare us all to bring an end to this pandemic and for all the others still to come and beyond that. So those are the lessons I've garnered, and I'm going to now turn to three terrific students. I invite them to join me. So would you mind turning on your cameras, please? Our students are Adney Silva, class of 22, who represents our student constituency in residence here on campus. We're going to talk to Hermela Assefa, class of 22, who is a commuter student. And we're going to talk to Holly Batchelder, class of 23, who is representing our remote students. She's currently on this call from Florida. So if I could have the three of you join me, I would be delighted to see you. Let me see. I'm going to find you on my screen. There you are. Great. Okay. Hello, Adney. Hello, Holly. Hello, Hermela. Thank you for doing this. So before I throw you the first question, you know that I had planned to ask you to introduce yourselves. So I'd like you to tell us what is important to you in your biography. How do you identify yourselves now as student leaders in the time of a pandemic at Franklin and Marshall? Hermela, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Hermela. I am a Black student from Ethiopia. I am from Bonchak College House, Best House, and I live in Northern Virginia, but I'm not commuting with family in Lancaster. I am a public health major on the sociology track, and I am co-president of the African Caribbean Association here at FNM.
Hermela, thank you. That was a great introduction, much better than any of us could have done for you. Thank you. Holly, do you want to pick up what's most important to you?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Holly Batchelder, and I live in Sarasota, Florida. I am a part of Brooks House, and I am the treasurer for Brooks House Congress. I am also a part of the track and field team. I am a sprinter, and this past year I got involved in the development and experience lab, which we have on campus called the DAX lab.
Thank you, Holly. Okay, Adney, your turn to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adney Silva. I'm a junior. I'm from Staten Island, New York, and I'm also from Bonchek College House, Best House. I'm an intended special studies major in business, government, and theater. And currently on campus, I'm the president of Poor Richards. I'm a first-year HA in Wise College House, a member of Bonchek Congress, the Rumspringas F&M Players, and I'm the lead singer of a band on campus called Vanilla.
Thank you. So you can see that not only do our three student panelists represent our three constituencies this year, this fall, but they also represent a really wide range of the things that so many of you are involved in. So let me ask you the first question. So students, I identified the things that I've learned: interdependence, there is no roadmap, defamiliarization. So I'd like to know, can you put in a couple of words, what would you say is the most important thing that is new to you that you learned from functioning in this environment? Adney, let's go in reverse order. Do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think as an HA and navigating that role, I've definitely learned the most during this time. You know, all of the first years are experiencing F&M in such a weird, new, uncertain way, and it's really hard. And I've been trying my best to bring energy and life into their day-to-day, but there are some mental and social obstacles that feel impossible to overcome sometimes. So I would say the most important thing that I've learned in leading through this is to, one, provide hope, in my case, for the first years and remind them that this is temporary. You know, it is going to end at some point, but in the meantime, let's get through it together. And two, to be a friend, you know, whether it be a text message or just, you know, leaving a Post-it on your door or a physically distanced crew trip to Central Market. I've definitely witnessed how valuable interactions are in whatever capacity during this time.
Adney, I'm glad that you also raised the hard stuff. I invite you all to talk about the hard things because it's usually hard things that push us forward. Holly, what's going on for you? What would you say you learned about leadership and how to live under these circumstances?
I think for me personally, this past year, my leadership experience were more of being a part of a membership, not leading exactly from the front. And I think as a member of a group, it's very important to reach out to other people. The value of connecting with another person virtually or just sending a quick text, it's so important because we rely on that. We rely on that comfort of just reaching out to people. I think that is so important. So I would say something I definitely learned during this pandemic is to rely on that social leadership. It's very important to develop and continue those relationships with people that you have, the opportunities that you have begun. You don't want to lose what you had just started this past year, especially for all those sophomores out there. I understand we're all home and we've done great things this past year in our freshman year. We don't want to lose the progress we made. So keep connecting with people, I would say, is one of the most important things, because the connection to others, it really brings this pandemic, it washes it away from your field of view. And I mean, just reaching out to others, it's very comforting.
Thanks, Holly. Hermela, what about you?
Yeah, I think both of them said amazing things. I would add again, taking hold of all the opportunities that you have and making sure that you're still growing as a student, as a leader, as a community member, and in all areas that you're involved in, and not dwelling on your mistakes or this is challenging for all of us, but not dwelling on that and just moving forward, being able to just bounce back and acknowledge what's going on around you. I think another difficulty in this time is the civil unrest. Black people are still dying on the streets, and we need to continue to advocate. Activism is key right now, and being able to acknowledge and speak about it using the words that are very critical, and saying it with your full chest, I think allows us to move forward and continuing to advocate for these things.
Hermela, thank you, because you put us back in the context of the multifaceted crises that we're dealing with, right? This is not just about COVID-19. We have a pandemic of a different order that we're also trying to handle, and the two exacerbate each other. They make each other worse because of the disproportionate effects of COVID-19 on certain populations and because of the urgency of the social justice agendas that we all need to engage in. I'm really happy that you raised that because life is complicated. It's really complicated right now, and to pay attention to all of your priorities at the same time can be tough. I have found some unexpected gifts in this, and it sounds a little corny, but it is true that there are things I'm going to take away with me that I will continue to do when I'm no longer locked down in a pandemic. Is there anything that has emerged from this experience that you find useful that you don't think you would have discovered otherwise? I'm happy to take an answer from any one of you who wants to jump in. Just give me a little sign. Okay, Adney, go ahead.
Yeah, I think definitely through the pandemic, we've realized how much work and how many meetings and collaboration that can actually be efficiently done at home. You know, I was reading an article where I saw that the majority of individuals post-pandemic would actually prefer an 80% at home, like work at home, and then 20% into office, you know, after this pandemic is all over, which I think is really useful to come out of this from. And it's really important for institutions and companies to understand and experience that, because especially for workers that have, you know, families at home or are in different circumstances where being away from home is hard. So I think that's a useful thing that will come out of this for sure.
Thanks, Adney. Hermela, Holly, anything you want to add? Holly, go for it.
I think to add on to what Adney was saying about the usefulness, what a good thing that we find in this pandemic is, I think a trait that comes out of all of us is flexibility. It's such an important, concept and tool that we use in our personalities that is so necessary because, like Adney was saying, now the home is becoming the workplace, and same for college students, it's becoming the place where you do your work. So by bringing it into your home, you have to be flexible with not only your career priorities or your school priorities, but also your family's priorities. It all becomes together, and there's definitely a level of flexibility that needs to be learned.
Hermela, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would say, again, in addition to flexibility, is being strategic and working collaboratively with others, again, and I guess building a support system that's sustainable is extremely important. And I think living in the moment, because there's just a lot of uncertainties right now, but being able to take hold of what you can control and day by day. I know right now it's like tomorrow's different and you can't essentially plan ahead all the time, but given what you know and what you have, thinking strategically has been really important, in addition to setting boundaries for yourself and prioritizing self-care, prioritizing your mental health, and again, building on that support system.
Let me ask you, what's been the hardest? What's hardest about all this? Expected, something you would have expected or something you wouldn't have expected that actually turns out to be pretty tough under these circumstances? Yeah, go ahead, Holly.
I think something that's hard, especially for learning remotely and at home, is separating your time of your free time and your work time. Because when you're home, you equate that with now it's your time to do where you do your homework and your schoolwork and your studying, instead of like a library that it's meant to be your studying, but your room is where you take care of personal business or you sleep. Now everything's in one area. So for me, something that's challenging is separating that, learning to take a break, go out for a run. You have to relax. You got to decompress. You got to get outside of this work area and do something different that isn't your schoolwork. So I think it's so important to, and something that I've been learning to overcome, is breaking up the day and figuring out a positive way to do work while also, as Hermela said, taking care of your mental health and giving yourself a break.
Anything else to add? Yeah, Hermela, please.
I think saying no has been difficult during these times. There's a lot of amazing opportunities now that we're in a virtual world. I know being there's always something that I want to do, but being able again to set that boundary and being able to just find ways that you can put things together and things like that, to be able to be efficient.
Adney?
I think finding motivation has been super hard for me. You know, as an extrovert, I need to be around people and people give me energy. So, you know, without that source, trying to get that from somewhere else has been hard. But I've definitely learned a lot through that experience as well. So just trying to navigating my work and a bunch of different responsibilities without that extra stimulation and without that collaboration in person has been difficult, but we've been getting through it.
Yeah, I echo that. Intrinsic motivation can be tough to muster, especially after weeks and weeks and months of lacking those things that generally give you the structure to life and the spark of life. So let me just ask you this. We're looking ahead to a future that will be marked by this event, and as our interim vice president for student affairs, Dr. Deb Moriarty, said in a communication to students last week, your generation is really indelibly marked by the pandemic. It hit you at a particularly formative moment, whether you were finishing high school or in your college years already. And you are all going to take this forward with you in really important ways as you move into leadership positions outside college. Can you already anticipate what you're taking with you because of living through your college years under the reign of COVID-19? Is there anything different about this that you think you're going to be able to offer the working world, the activist world, the creative world that you're taking from this that you might not have gotten otherwise? Yeah, Hermela, please.
I think you just said it. I think creativity is and adaptability. Those are two words I would use, because it's like you don't know, so you got to be able to have multiple different ways of thinking and being creative on coming up with solutions. It might be on spot. You might again working with your team. And so creativity and adaptability.
Those are watchwords to live by. Yes, I think we all need to tattoo them on our forearm or something. Yeah, exactly. Anything else, Adney or Holly? So, okay, so let me ask you this then. We talked about managing fear. And that is something that was unexpected for me, is having to manage other people's fear. Have you seen that from your families, from your friends, from people you know from other organizations? How are you managing your own fears, and how are you managing the fears of those who love you? And I know I've got you in uncharted territory, by the way. I did not prep you with this question. This is completely spontaneous, but I think it's important to talk about because that has been an unexpected preoccupation for me. Okay, Holly, you said you were ready to go, please.
Yes. I think something that's helped me with my personal fear and also with my family's fear is to find strength. And the way my family and we find strength in our faith. We think that's a very important part of our life, and we're able to look beyond this pandemic and look beyond our own fear and trust in a God that's greater than this pandemic. So that is how we cope with our fear, and for us, it's our best way to do it.
Thank you for that. Adney, Hermela, how are you managing I'm sure your families are worried about you. I can only imagine. I worry about my children. Yeah, Adney?
Yeah, I think we all have really different boundaries when it comes to this pandemic. Everyone has very specific things that they're comfortable with and uncomfortable with. So the way, I've been managing is just being prepared to listen to those around you and making sure that you're keeping everyone else's fears in mind while also not compromising your own. I think that's really important.
Yeah, listening and acknowledging that fear and that stress and that anxiety, even if you have to pursue a different path. Yeah, agreed. Hermela, I want to go back to a word that you used for a minute. We talked about creativity ever so briefly, or at least raised it as an important key to how we're going to manage from here on out. So in this instance, in a circumstance for which there really are no good new words, I turn to poetry to find the unspoken, to find a way to talk about what we're all dealing with. What would your creative outlets be? And can you imagine creating yourselves to somehow express this cultural moment? Can this be sung, Adney?
Yeah, I've definitely done the most music that I've done on my own during these past 6 months than I've done before. So it definitely has opened outlets for creativity, just like Hermela has said before. I agree with that.
Oh, go on a little more. Tell us a bit more. So what have you been doing more of than you had before?
Well, yeah, of course, we're always doing live performances on campus, and like with all the groups, there's always in-person things, shows and everything. And with the pandemic, that's all gone. So I've finally been able to like record my own things or record covers with friends and things like that to put online for people to see in absence of live performances. And that's something I've always wanted to do, but never really had the time for.
Thank you for that. Holly, Hermela, any form of creativity that you think is going to be useful for you to make sense of all of this or to handle it?
I think so. As a student leader, especially of the African Caribbean Association, we've had to be really creative with lack of a lot of in-person activities, which our club usually, has. And so now it's like, how can we build community virtually and as well as like a few in person, but it's like, how can we forge these relationships in a way that we're also sharing cultural knowledge, which is the mission of our club.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. Yes. And I think there is a deep tie here between social responsibility, activism, and learning how to deal with an illness that took us all by surprise. So yes, finding different ways to work that identity group that is so important and is such a cornerstone of what we do for you and what we do for the community. Professor Strick, are there questions coming in? I have a million of them, so I can keep going, but if you have any coming in, I'd be happy to have you ask them.
We do have some questions coming in already. One remark says, not a question, but would just like to make a comment. Says, I would love to recommend guided meditation as a powerful, centering, fear-releasing tool during this time. Students should stay on because the questions are addressed to you as much as to President Altman. One says, this is from a faculty member that says, the virtual protest tree has a lot of complaints about the quality of academics under these circumstances. Students say that they have to teach themselves and that they're paying too much to be asked to do that. On the other hand, there's a desire to involve students actively in the learning process and putting them and their creativity at the center. What do the student panelists think about how academic life is going right now? Would any of you like to comment on that?
I invite you to be frank. I really do. It's an important moment for us all to take a snapshot of how things are going. So please go ahead. Adney.
So I definitely think the module system was the best compromise we could have. That's something that we should confront right off the bat. But I do think having this material that's spanned over such a long time condensed into these 7 weeks, it's a lot sometimes, and sometimes it's intense. And with a class that I'm in right now, it really is unfortunate that we're only scratching the surface on Hobbes and Locke and only spending 2 classes on them when we could be spending a month on them, and not having the time for discussions and in-depth conversations that we usually do, and which F&M classes are known for, really. So that is just something that I think we have to deal with. That's just how it is. And I think with the module system, it can be overwhelming sometimes, but there is still so much support that is offered that we're all taking advantage of, or hope we're taking advantage of.
Holly, why don't you pick up from there?
Yes, I'd like to add on what Adney was saying. I completely agree that the college and the professors, they're giving us a lot of support. I mean, if you need help, they're there in office hours. They're willing to help you walk through the problems. Personally, for me, I'm looking to major in neuroscience, so I'm taking a lot of heavy STEM classes currently. And it's just very difficult during the module system, which I'm sure that many other science majors and math majors can agree with, when you're taking those classes, because it takes a lot of practice to understand the material. And unfortunately, sometimes the professor can't go over as many examples or problems. So you have to learn on your own. So it is very true that currently we are doing a lot of learning on our own to fully understand the material. If you want to succeed, we have to pursue the material on our own even more in depth. And it's just something that we have to work with. And, the professors are always there to help them.
Hermela, please.
Yeah, I would second everything they just said. It's overwhelming, difficult. I would say being able to adapt to it has been really extremely difficult. And I think this is where equity comes in, because there's a lot of people at home that have family challenges or just different varying circumstances. And then also in person, different learning styles and things like that, especially for me, I'm more hands-on. And so it has been really difficult, in addition to like work, with work study not being allowed for people at home. That's another level of challenges, because they might have to find a way to sustain themselves. And so these difficulties layered on top of the already rigorous academics at F&M has been extremely difficult for me. And I'm sure, like, as we saw on the protest tree, a lot of people agree with.
Thank you for that. And yes, indeed, it's very difficult to provide those building blocks of equity when people are in very, very different situations. I think it's a very real concern, and I'm glad you raised it, Hermela. Professor Strick, is there another?
I'm sure I speak for a number of professors in saying that we too feel at sea sometimes adapting to this new system. And the pace can feel somewhat unrelenting at times because everything is speeded up and condensed. So it has been a unique experience to feel like that has softened some of the barriers that sometimes exist between students and faculty, because we really do all feel like we're in the same boat. And we can see that we're all under the same degree of strain, but trying to muster the same degree of creativity and flexibility, considering the situation. Here's another question. This is from a student graduating in 2021, a senior. How has the pandemic changed you as people? And I take it that that's addressed to all of you.
Adney.
So I've definitely learned to appreciate alone time. Definitely, usually I'm used to going from one thing to the next and being like constantly stimulated, and it's very rare where I can sit down by myself for hours or even days at a time, which I've had to experience at certain moments during these past 6 months, and I really like it. I really enjoy it, and I think learning to appreciate and accepting just being in your own company is super important, and I am definitely taking and learning that lesson coming out of this.
Hermela, Holly, do you want to add anything about how this has changed you as a person? Sure, Holly.
Personally, for me, I would say I've definitely become more self-reliant and more independent. I would also say that I've learned more about my family and how much important family time really is. I think that's a part that gets lost, especially during the college years, because you're not at home, and the pandemic forced us to come home and forced everyone to stay in the house for at least a couple months right there. So I think it definitely opened my eyes to the importance of family.
Hermela, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I second Holly. I think family time has been really important. As it's been difficult with a lot going on, but I think having that time it's a blessing. I think staying home and spending quality time, and also I think it helped me improve my compassion all around.
I want to add one very pragmatic detail, which is that For a while, close to a month, I was working on the West Coast. And so I was only 3 hours behind the East Coast, but I developed deep empathy for everyone who is in a different time zone. And I had to overcome my very pronounced night owl tendencies. I'm so much a night owl. I had never seen a sunrise. I hadn't seen a sunrise in a long time. And working on the West Coast, I was suddenly up at 5 and 5:30 every morning and watched the sun come up over the South Hills of Eugene, Oregon every day as I got ready to work on East Coast time. So I developed a real appreciation for the dislocation that many of our students studying remotely now are dealing with, whether it's physical location and or time zone or cultural or linguistic defamiliarization. That is a process that adds another layer. It's actually in some ways one of those equity issues that you raised, Hermela. So that is absolutely, that's a tiny tactic, but it's a stretch, and many people are stretching in a lot of ways. Professor Strick, what else?
It's a really interesting question in some ways. I've been encouraging everybody I speak to, if you don't keep a journal, start keeping a journal now, if only because you're going to ask yourself 10 years from now, what did I think about during that time? And, someday your children and grandchildren are going to say, what did you think about during that time? You cannot believe how your own writing brings it back to life years later if you have it to look back on. It's really worth starting. Let's see, we have one more question so far. Students, how is this situation making an impact on your thinking about planning for life after college? And that comes from a staff member of the college.
Hermela.
I've thought about this a lot now that I'm a junior, and I would say definitely, I think I'm more into pursuing grad school just because of where the economy is and overall challenges that are occurring right now. I think I've been more adamant about applying to grad school, something in public health.
That's great. Breaking the mold and finding the new path. Holly, Adney, anything to add on that? Yeah, Holly.
Personally, my goal is to go into medical school, and I'd like to become a developmental pediatrician. But I think with the pandemic, since it paused everything for a good 6 months so far, almost 8 months, I think that I'm going to have to wait a little bit longer to enter medical school to pursue more experience in the medical field before going into medical school. So for me, I think it's held things up a bit, but also presented, new opportunities instead of rushing right in, actually taking it a little slower and looking more into research, looking more into, workplaces in the hospital that don't require a medical degree. So I think that would be mine.
Anything to add, Adney?
Yeah, so I know after college, I definitely want to work in politics in some capacity. So I think the way the pandemic has really helped me leverage my expectations for that is I'm able to apply for internships this fall and this spring without having to be in DC or having to be in a certain city, and doing these things online and gaining that exposure and experience while still being here and being at school. So I think the pandemic has definitely opened those opportunities and doors that would otherwise be closed.
Professor Strick, I have one more question, but I'll cede the floor if you've received any more from our audience.
That's all we've gotten so far, so why don't you go ahead with yours?
Okay, and I know we're almost out of time, and I also respect the Common Hour tradition of ending on time. So, all right, my three panelists, we talked about creativity. Project yourselves into your future. It's 10 years, 15 years out. You're talking to your children, and you say to them, when I was an undergraduate at Franklin and Marshall, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and let me tell you what it was like. Give me a couple of choice sentences. What will you be telling your children? Or someone else's children? I see you pondering. Okay, Holly, you first.
I would tell them that it was very strange and very weird. We went from no masks to all of a sudden everybody's face was covered and everyone was home. So I think it was a very strange adjustment that we all had to get used to very quickly.
All right, and I'm sure you'll have photographs of yourself in a mask, right? A whole digital album that you can show off with all your masks. Adney, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I would definitely tell them that, we were able to experience almost the entire world like shutting down for a couple of months. And that's something that we don't think we'd ever really witness. And the fact that we were able to see that and see what happened during and after and how it's going to impact us afterwards has been, it's going to be pretty crazy. So.
And Hermela?
I would say uncomfortable but insightful.
Oh, excellent words. Uncomfortable but insightful. Absolutely. Maybe those are our closing words, Professor Strick. What do you think?
I think that it would be hard to close on a better note. Thanks so much, everybody. I'm really glad that our new Common Hour year is off to such a great start. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next week at 1:30.
Thank you to the panelists, and thank you, Professor Strick, for running this. It was a real honor to launch this year's Common Hour. Thank you all, Adney, Holly, Hermela. Many thanks.
Thank you, Emily, for your translation.
And Emily as well. And our technologist, thanks, Josh, for all the people who put this together. And yeah, see you next week.
Bye-bye.